Here's a question that sounds simple, but will unravel something profound. Why do you have to keep working, keep learning, keep pushing, even when you've already succeeded? Why does a company that dominated its market a decade ago now struggle to survive? Why does a politician who won in a landslide get wiped out a few years later? The answer isn't capitalism, or isn't just capitalism. The answer is evolution. Specifically, it's a principle from evolutionary biology, and once you understand it, you'll see it everywhere. Today, we're going to dive deep, and then we're going to use it as a test, a tool for separating what's real from what isn't, by observing what the most powerful people in the world actually do. Let's start at the beginning. In 1973, an evolutionary biologist named Lee Van Valen published a paper with a strange observation. He was studying extinction rates across a huge range of species, and he found something he didn't expect. The probability of extinction stayed roughly constant over time, regardless of how long a species had already survived. You might expect that a species that's been around for 10 million years is somehow better at surviving than one that's only been around for a million. But the facts say no. Longevity doesn't buy you safety. A species that has survived for 50 million years is just as likely to go extinct as a species that has just appeared evolutionary. Van Valen called this the Red Queen hypothesis, borrowing a line from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. In that book, the Red Queen tells Alice, "Now, here you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. Predators evolve, parasites evolve, competitors evolve, prey evolves. The moment you stop evolving, everything around you is still going. The arms race never ends. There is no finish line. There is no peak at which you can rest. You either keep running and evolving, or you fall behind." Now here's the thing. This doesn't just stay in biology. The Red Queen hypothesis describes any system where multiple entities are simultaneously adapting to each other. Let's take economics first, because it's the most obvious. When Amazon began dominating the retail market, every existing retailer had a choice: adapt or die. The ones who said, "We've survived for 80 years, we know what we're doing," like Sears, Kmart, or Toys R Us, died. Amazon was doing the same thing they were, but they were doing it faster, cheaper, easier, and with better information. Retailers who survived, like Walmart, had to rebuild their supply chains, invest in e-commerce, and develop data capabilities they didn't need before. But that still didn't make them safe. It just kept them in the race, because Amazon kept evolving too. And then came other competitors. And now, everyone's racing against each other, and against AI, which is itself evolving. The same pattern appears in technology. Every phone maker that dominated before the smartphone era, like Nokia, Motorola, and BlackBerry, evolved to be extremely good at a game that suddenly changed. Nokia's engineering was genuinely world-class. They just were optimized for a different competitive environment, and when the environment changed, their optimizations became liabilities. In geopolitics, nations face the same dynamic. Military capability, economic complexity, diplomatic networks, all of it has to keep pace with what rivals are doing. The United States dominated global manufacturing after World War II, partly because it was the only major industrial economy whose physical infrastructure hadn't been destroyed in the war. But it was only a temporary gift. Within just a few decades, Germany and Japan had rebuilt, and the US advantage evaporated. And now even those economies have challengers from other countries that have developed their own manufacturing sectors. At the biological level, it's been most convincingly demonstrated in host-parasite relationships. Parasites are, in a sense, the perfect antagonist. They're small, they reproduce quickly, they can evolve fast, and their entire existence depends on exploiting a host that is simultaneously trying to resist them. This is the arms race made visible even at the micro level. Sexual reproduction, by the way, is thought to be a Red Queen adaptation, despite being extraordinarily costly from an evolutionary standpoint. Asexual reproduction is far more efficient. A female who reproduces asexually passes 100% of her genes to each offspring. A female who reproduces sexually passes only 50%. So why does sexual reproduction even exist at all? One of the leading answers is the genetic shuffling that comes from sexual reproduction. It produces offspring with new genetic combinations that parasites haven't seen before. It's a biological randomization strategy, a way of generating variation so that no single parasite can adapt perfectly to exploit the whole population. You change the genetic locks, So the keys that work today don't work tomorrow, because standing still is death. Now we need to talk a bit about game theory, because the Red Queen hypothesis is, at its core, a game theory phenomenon. Game theory is the mathematics of strategic interaction and the situations where the outcome for any player depends on not just what they do, but on what others do. And it gives us the tools to understand why the arms race is so hard to escape. The core concept is the Nash equilibrium, named after mathematician John Nash. A Nash equilibrium is a state where no player can improve their outcome by changing their strategy, given what everyone else is doing. It's a kind of strategic stability, where nobody has a reason to deviate. But in competitive evolutionary systems, Nash equilibria tend to be moving targets, or they involve strategies that look irrational from the outside. Take the prisoner's dilemma, the most famous game in game theory. Two players each choose to cooperate or defect. If both cooperate, they both get a good outcome. If one defects while the other cooperates, the defector gets an even better outcome, and the cooperator gets the worst outcome. If both defect, they both get a mediocre outcome. The Nash equilibrium of a one-shot prisoner's dilemma is mutual defection, with both players rationally choosing to betray each other, even though mutual cooperation would make them both better off. And this specific scenario plays out constantly in real life, in all kinds of arms races. But when the prisoner's dilemma is played repeatedly, and when players interact over and over with memory of what the others have done before, the Nash equilibrium shifts. Cooperation becomes rational. The strategy tit for tat begins by cooperating, then copying whatever the other player did last turn, which turns out to be extraordinarily robust in repeated games. It rewards cooperation. It punishes defection, and it forgives. And after punishing, it returns to cooperation if the other player does. In biological and social evolution, most interactions are repeated. You keep encountering the same competitors, the same pathogens, the same allies. And so the strategies that evolve tend to be reciprocal. They track the other player's behavior and respond in kind. It's sophisticated tracking. Each side monitors the other and adapts continuously. But the dark side of game theory is, in an arms race, even if you don't want to escalate, you may be forced to. If your competitor invests in a new capability and you don't match it, you fall behind. And falling behind in a competitive system has consequences that are harder to recover from. So both parties invest in escalation, even though neither would prefer the escalated world. The Red Queen dynamic produces what game theorists call a coordination failure, a world everyone agrees is worse, and that nobody can unilaterally escape. This is why military spending consumes trillions of dollars globally every year, even among the nations that have no desire to actually fight wars. It's why companies spend billions on advertising, even though all their competitors do the same, and the net effect is neutral. It's why politicians have to do things in campaigns like negative ads, social media, and constant fundraising that they may personally find distasteful. The moment they unilaterally disarm, they fall behind. The game theoretic insight is crucial. The arms race isn't irrational, but it's a rational response to a competitive structure that produces outcomes nobody chose. But now we need to ask a harder question. How well do humans actually navigate these dynamics? How rational are we really? The honest answer, backed by decades of behavioral economics and cognitive science, is not very. And understanding how we fail helps explain a lot of what we see in the world. We are extraordinary pattern recognition machines, so extraordinary that we find patterns in noise. We see faces in clouds. We see conspiracies and coincidences. This tendency is called apophenia, and it's a systematic bias that becomes more dangerous the more stressed and uncertain the environment. The temptation to find a hidden explanation becomes very strong. I want to share an argument that I find genuinely compelling, and one that I think is underused in how we reason about the world. The Red Queen hypothesis also gives us a powerful epistemological tool, a way to test whether things are real. Since we live in a world of intense, relentless competition at the top, the people who run nations, who run multinational corporations, who command armies, who allocate their capital at mass scale, these people are operating in the most viciously competitive environments on Earth. Their rivals are intelligent, well-resourced, and desperate to win. In this environment, if something works, the elites use it. If a technology, or a strategy, or a method of gathering information provides genuine competitive advantage, it gets adopted, and it gets adopted quickly, because the Red Queen hypothesis demands it. Competitors who adopt an effective tool gain an edge, and those who don't fall behind. This gives us a test. Look at what powerful people actually do. Look at how they actually make decisions. Look at what tools they actually rely on. And then ask, what are they not doing? And what are they not using? They don't hire psychics to advise on strategic decisions. They don't consult astrologers before making business acquisitions. They don't use homeopathy as a primary medical treatment. They don't rely on angel readings or tarot cards or crystal energy to guide investment decisions. They don't perform rituals to influence the financial markets. And they don't organize their war strategies around numerology. If any of these things worked, if psychic information were real and actionable, if ritual magic produced measurable effects, if astrology reliably predicted market movements, the competitive pressure of elite systems would have already forced their adoption. There's even a case study that strengthens this argument, because the US government already did try this. Project Stargate was a 20-year-long, multi-million-dollar program to investigate remote viewing and psychic phenomena for intelligence applications. It was run seriously and with methodological rigor. Project Stargate was even started due to the belief that the Soviets were finding success in their own research on the topic. The conclusion? The effect sizes, if they existed at all, were too small and too unreliable to be operationally useful. The program was then shut down. The intelligence community investigated it and walked away. The same logic applies to conspiracies of the sort that involve coordinated and secret transgenerational control of world events. The argument isn't that powerful people don't coordinate, because they obviously do, and we can see them doing so. The argument is that large-scale, multi-generational secret conspiracies face a Red Queen problem of their own. The participants are themselves competing with each other. Inside any powerful group, there are factions, ambitions, betrayals, and defections. The intelligence services of rival nations are constantly trying to penetrate and expose any significant coordination. Journalists, academics, regulators, and competitors all have incentives to find and expose these too. In a world of intense, constant competitive pressure, genuine secrets have a very short half-life. We can already see the coordination that exists. The World Economic Forum exists, and we can observe what it does. The coordinated lobbying of financial institutions is well documented. Elite universities serve as coordinating mechanisms for class reproduction. And none of this needs to be hidden, because it's operating within legal structures and social norms. But Wilder claims that a small group of elites control every election outcome, or every central bank decision, or are behind every major terrorist event, run into the Red Queen problem. If such coordination were real and effective, rival elite groups would develop it too. Chinese intelligence would replicate it. Russian oligarchs would build competing networks. American tech billionaires who aren't in the club would find a way to disrupt it, because their contribution to that disruption would be wildly profitable. The competitive dynamics of elite systems produce a world where advantages that are tangible get used fast, and advantages that aren't get quietly abandoned. But just because the Red Queen argument is a strong filter, it still isn't a perfect one. There are several categories that might be real and effective, but elites still don't use them, for reasons other than inefficacy. Elite competitive systems often have short time horizons. If a strategy or tool produces advantages on a longer time horizon, say 20 or 30 years, it may be systematically underused even if it works. Climate policy is a clear example of this. The long-term logic is overwhelming, but the short-term political incentives consistently underweigh it. This means this theory works best for evaluating tools that produce short-term, observable, competitive advantages, which is where most of the supernatural and conspiratorial claims live. If psychic intelligence were real, you'd want it now, to prepare for your meeting tomorrow. The short time horizon actually strengthens the argument against it. Also, some things that might work might end up being avoided because of how they look. Even if using astrology to make business decisions helped, being known as the head of a major corporation who uses astrology would probably damage your credibility with investors and analysts in ways that offset the benefit. This is a real caveat, but the limits would only last so long. If psychic intelligence produced significant advantages, competitive pressure would eventually overcome the negative reputational barrier. People would find ways to use it quietly. We'd eventually see the outcomes, even if we didn't see the mechanism. New, genuinely effective things take time to spread. There's always a gap between a tool or method becoming available and it becoming universally adopted among elites. The Red Queen test is more reliable for things that have been around long enough to be evaluated and adopted, or rejected and discarded. A new technology that's only been available for 2 years and hasn't been fully adopted yet doesn't tell us much. a practice that's been claimed to be powerful for centuries and still hasn't been systematically adopted by competitive elites, tells us a great deal. And sometimes, elites do adopt things that don't work, at least initially. So the test isn't, elites use it, therefore it works. The test is really the inverse. If something is claimed to be powerful and effective, and the claim has been around a long time, and elites don't ever use it, that's very strong evidence against it being real. The asymmetry matters. So what do you do with all of this? How do you actually make good decisions in a Red Queen world? Let's synthesize what the science of rational decision-making, combined with the Red Queen framework, actually recommends. First, embrace the discomfort of constant adaptation. The research on expertise and performance is unambiguous. What separates top performers in nearly every competitive domain is deliberate practice and continuous updating of their models. This means building adaptation into your operating system. This is the Red Queen adaptation at the individual level. You're running to stay in place relative to your own past self, but that's what it takes to keep pace with the competitive environment. Second, invest in reducing your cognitive biases. The biggest competitive advantages in modern knowledge economies often come not from having better information, but by processing information more accurately. If your competitors are systematically overconfident and you're calibrated, that becomes a huge edge over time. If your competitors are driven by tribalism and in-group favoritism, and you hire based on merit regardless of background, you'll accumulate better talent. This is why quantitative approaches to decision-making have become so dominant in elite competitive environments. Algorithms, statistical models, and data-driven frameworks don't solve everything, but they systematically reduce certain categories of human bias. Super forecasting research shows that people who think probabilistically, track their predictions, update on evidence, and actively seek disconfirming information outperform experts who rely on intuition and narrative thinking by enormous margins. Third, think about time horizons explicitly. The Red Queen hypothesis creates pressure to optimize for the short term, because that's where competitive pressure is most acute. But many of the most valuable investments like relationships, skills, and institutional trust pay off on long time horizons. The people who consistently win over decades are often the ones who resist short-term demands while still running the long-term race. Fourth, use the Red Queen hypothesis as a filter for your own beliefs. This is the most directly actionable point. When you encounter a claim, ask yourself, if this were real, what would the competitive dynamics look like? Who would be using it? What would the adoption pattern look like? For ideas that have been around long enough to be evaluated, the absence of elite adoption is significant evidence. Combine this with other epistemic tools like peer-reviewed research and mechanism plausibility, and you have a powerful framework for filtering signal from noise. There's one more piece of this puzzle that deserves its own discussion, because the Red Queen isn't the only dynamic at work in complex systems. There's a third dimension too. The evolutionary biologist David Sloan Wilson has argued, compellingly, that evolution operates not just at the individual level, but at the group level too. And when you think carefully about group selection, you get a bigger picture of the arms race. Groups that cooperate internally can outcompete groups that don't, even if internal cooperation requires individual sacrifice. This is the logic of eusocial insects, like the ants and bees and wasps, whose social structures are among the most successful on Earth. It's also the logic of human societies. We are cooperative at scales that no other animal approaches, and that cooperation is a major reason for our ecological dominance. But the Red Queen logic still operates between groups. Nations that develop better internal coordination tend to outcompete those that don't over long time horizons. Companies that develop genuine cultures of collaboration and trust outperform those driven by pure internal competition, at least in knowledge-intensive industries where creative work requires psychological safety. This means the optimal strategy in a Red Queen world isn't pure competition, it's selective cooperation. Compete externally and cooperate internally. Build coalitions that expand the range of what internal means. The most successful entities in competitive systems tend to be the ones that have figured out how to extend the radius of cooperation while maintaining competitive intensity at their boundaries. This is also a game theoretic insight. In repeated games with multiple players, coalition formation and reputation become crucial. Players who can credibly commit to cooperation and signal trustworthiness gain enormous advantages in building productive coalitions. This is why institutions of professional norms, industry standards, and international agreements emerge even in fiercely competitive environments. They're coordination mechanisms that allow players to escape some of the waste of pure arms race dynamics. The Red Queen doesn't go away, but inside the coalition, she slows down. The Red Queen hypothesis started as a description of extinction rates in the fossil record. It became a theory of the arms race between species, but its deepest lesson is about the nature of competition itself, and about what it means to live in a world where standing still is the same as falling behind. The goal is to run intelligently, to invest in the right capabilities, to update your beliefs with new evidence, to cooperate where cooperation beats competition, to resist the cognitive biases that make us run in circles, and to keep asking, relentlessly, what's actually working? Who's using it? And what does the absence of adoption tell us about what's real? The goal isn't to win the race, because there is no winning. There is only running.